Okay, so Abhidharma text.
Yeah. Well, since everyone's here, I will just launch into it. The book I'm using for tonight's talk is a very neat one called Essentials of Buddhist Philosophy. It was written in 1947 by a Japanese scholar named Yunro Takakusu. It is still one of the best books ever written on Buddhist philosophy. And he talks about Buddhist philosophy through a number of different Japanese schools. And then he goes back. And so it's sort of each of the Japanese schools preserves a different part of Buddhist philosophy. So, of course, there's Zen schools and Pure Land schools. But there are also a Yogacara school called Hasso. There's an Abhidharma school. There's a Jamaka school. There's all these different schools. Well, the one that interested me, given what we're looking at, the Abhidharma, is in fact the Abhidharma was preserved as a school in China. China had an interesting way of doing Buddhist denomination in China. They each specialized in a particular text. So you had a lot of different schools, like the one school just like where the Lotus Sutra was the main text. Another school, the Avantamsaka Sutra was the main text. That's Huayan. The Pure Land schools were based on certain Pure Land sutras. And there was a school in China called the Kosha School. It had a different name. That's a Japanese name for it. It's called Kosha, but I think it would probably be the same in China. And it's taken from the Abhidharma Kosha of Vasubandhu. Vasubandhu is very famous as a Yogacara teacher, but before he wrote his Yogacara treatises, he wrote what is considered the master work in Abhidharma, where he summed up all the Abhidharma teachings. This is around 400 AD. And so based on his work, which was translated into Chinese, this school called the Kosha School develops, which then sent up to Japan, and is really sort of a subsect of the Yogacara school there. But at any rate, it's fascinating because in the history of this, you can see this kind of tradition that sort of goes through a period of development, gets finalized in certain ways, and then passed on even to the present day. So in this discussion of the Abhidharma school, the Kosha school in Japan, the Takakusu writes, he says, first of all, let us consider what the word Dharma means in Buddhism. It is derived from the verb dur, D-H-R, to hold or to hear, and its noun form, dharma, would mean that which is held to, or the ideal, if we limit its meaning to mental affairs only. The ideal will be different in scope as conceived by different individuals. In the case of the Buddha, Dharma is perfect enlightenment or perfect wisdom, Bodhi. Second, the ideal as expressed in words, or the Dharma as ideal expressed in words, will be the sermons, dialogues, teachings, and doctrines of the Buddha. Thirdly, the ideal is set forth for his pupils as the rule, discipline, precept, and morality. Fourthly, the ideal to be realized will be the principle, theory, truth, reason, nature, law, condition. And fifthly, the ideal, as realized in a general sense, will be reality, fact, thing, element, created and non-created, mind and matter. In the realistic school of the Abhidharma, the Kosha school, the word Dharma is used mostly in the fifth and last meaning. I'll unpack this a little bit here. So, what does Dharma mean? Well, Dharma means Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna. So, he starts off here by saying, well, Dharma is, first of all, it's the awakening of the Buddha. That is Samadhi, the enlightenment of the Buddha, the meditative realization. Second, it's the Dharma as what is taught by the Buddha. And thirdly, it's conduct or discipline, Shila. So Shila, Samadhi, Prajna, which we are well familiarized with, that's three meanings of the Dharma. The Dharma is, in fact, in essence, those three things. But then it is also, the fourth definition he gives is very interesting. And of those, he said here, principle, theory, truth, reason, nature, law, condition. And of those, I think the word I like is the truth, that the Dharma is the truth. It is what is true about things. Or we might say the natural, as the word Dzogchen uses it in terms of the natural state. It's like the Tao, the principle, the truth of things. And then the last one, and the one that they're really concerned with, is the Dharma is reality. The Dharma is what is right before us all the time, right now. It's the phenomenal. And it's that. And so when you combine the fourth, which is truth, with the fifth, which is the reality before us, you get this definition of Abhidharma as the truth of what is before us. So that's the definition he comes up with, the truth of what is before us. So that gives you a whole new perspective on the teachings in the Abhidharma. They're going to try and enumerate the truth of what is before us, the truth of the phenomenal world, which is also the truth of who we are as well. The Abhidharma also has this meaning of further Dharma, and it follows the Buddhist sutras. So there's three baskets to the Buddhist teachings. There's the Vinaya, the Book of Discipline. There's the Buddha's teachings, the sutras, and then there's this Abhidharma or further Dharma. And the further Dharma, again, is their systemization, their system of what reality is. So it's very profound stuff. They're going to attempt to share what reality is as gained through meditative experience, understanding, and pure conduct. And just a little bit of history, the particular school that was most influential in the Abhidharma tradition, that's going to influence the Yogacharans, and then later China, Japan, Tibet, everyone, is the Sarvastivadins. And the Sarvastivadins were a sect that split from the Theravadins some ancient time, probably several centuries by King Ashoka's time, about the 3rd century BC. Theravada, which is much more known because it exists as a school, the only Hinayana school in existence. And they went to South India and Sri Lanka. The Sarvastivadins, interestingly enough, went to Kashmir and Gandhara. So they're the basic Buddhists up in Gandhara, are Sarvastivadins. And then that Sarvastivadins are going to eventually morph into Yogacharans. And that's why Abhidharma is sort of preserved within the Yogacara tradition. That's sort of their kind of root. They have their roots. Even though they're a Mahayana school, they have their roots in this particular school of the Abhidharma. And according to this book, their Abhidharma, the Sarvastivadin Abhidharma, was first developed by a teacher in 8 books as early as perhaps the 2nd century BC. And then there was a big commentary written on it. And Abhidharma teachings eventually get translated, go to China, where they are translated into Chinese about the 4th century, 400 AD. And that's when this school begins in China that devotes itself to the study of the Abhidharma. Then after they started with this one, they get a translation of the first translation of the Abhidharma Kosha, Vasubandhu's great work, and that one becomes their main text after that. That's translated a couple times in the 6th and 7th centuries, and that is the development of the one that then goes to Japan. Yeah, and it goes through Yogacara. So Yogacara is sort of keeping a tradition of Abhidharma alive as sort of a subspecialty within the Yogacara school. The Sarvastivadins, this is a side note, are interesting philosophically because they held the unusual belief that the 3 periods of time, the past, present, and future, were all simultaneously and equally real and equally populated with elements. So that the past was actually an ongoing stream that never ended. The present was an ongoing stream that never ended, and the future was an ongoing stream that never ended. And all 3 of these, you couldn't get from one to the other, but they in a sense influenced each other. It was the same sort of energy that was feeding them all, just like gold could take different forms, or that you could be a father, a son, and a husband, 3 different roles, even though you're the same person. So they have this unusual idea of the past and the future as existing all the time, which would make for some good science fiction. Now, the general philosophy, though, of the Abhidharma, and the Sarvastivadins, which we're basically getting in different forms, even though they start the Abhidharma and then people add to it, and people write commentaries on it and summarize it, so it kind of evolves over this long period. By the time Vasubandhu is writing on it, the tradition has been going on for 600 years. And they're not even done with it, because in China, the Yogacara school, which becomes the Kosha school in Japan, they're going to do a final version of Yogacara Abhidharma, which is different than this earlier one. And when I say system, is that they put the basic idea of Abhidharma is that reality is composed of discrete elements that are always combining with each other to produce momentary, instantaneous mind phenomena, events. So each moment of our life, we're experiencing things. We're experiencing the phenomenal world, and that experience, there's only generally, there's this, everything is happening instantaneously, momentarily, and there's nothing behind that stream. And if you remember last week, we talked about Nagasena, and the king asked Nagasena, where, is there one who knows, behind the 5 senses, who experiences everything? And Nagasena says, no, there is no one who knows. And that's a very important thing, is that there's no abiding substance at all. There's nothing behind this process of elements combining and creating reality that goes on and on and on. There's no soul, there's no self, there's no one who knows, there's no God, there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing other than this stream of mental combinations going on, which they're going to enumerate. And in the early version, the one we're going to go over tonight that I sent out a chart to emailed the chart to you, there are 75 of these elements that are combined to create reality. Later on, the Yogacara one, they get up to about 108 elements by adding some additional ones. And we'll look at that and how you get a Mahayana version of this Abhidharma. So appearances are temporal, and the main point is to detach yourself from them. So the whole idea is that there's nothing other than the combinations, as I said. So there's no self. And the famous statement here is, no actor apart from action, no perceiver apart from perception, no conscious subject behind consciousness. So there's the stream, there's actions, there are perceptions, and the action and the actor are all happen at the same moment. There's no separation between us and our experience. We are our experience. That there's never you can't break those two up and have two things going on here. In a sense, to say no self is to say non-duality. That there's that we are our thoughts and our actions. We're no more. There's nothing beyond that. As far as that is what all that we are. Is that combination of actions, perceptions, consciousness, and such, and these other elements, which we'll get to. So that momentary stream of thought, the coming together and dispersal of causes and conditions, and in that sense, we're always creating a reality, and that reality is always changing. So that's the Abhidharma philosophy in a nutshell. This is the chart I'm going to be talking to. This is their chart of the 75 elements. And again, there are lots of different versions. Every school had its own version of the chart of the elements. This one is very nice. It's also available to me. So these are the elements that make up existence according to the Kosha School. And this chart is very interesting because it lines up nicely with the skandhas. So another way in which the Buddha taught in a sort of a simpler way in the sutras, the Buddha didn't teach this 75 element chart. That's sort of created by people later. That's their further dharma. But the Buddha taught the 5 skandhas, and he said there is no self. All there is form, perception, feeling, concept, and consciousness. And that those things, that process is when you look at who you are, that you have those. That's what you are, and there's nothing behind that. There's no person other than form, perception, feeling, concept, and consciousness. And in this chart, they start with the first 10 elements are called, in fact, the form elements. So they're going to kind of blow out the skandhas in a more detailed way. So what is form? Well, form is the sense organs, the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, and the body, and they are the sense objects, the forms that the eye sees, sight, sound, smells, taste, and touch, things that we touch. So those are the first 10 elements, and that constitutes form. That constitutes the physical world. Now you might say, wasn't the physical world more than my 5 senses and what they're telling me? And obviously the answer is no. So already we have a mind-only view, right? We're not talking about, the only way we know form is through our senses. So the senses, the arisal, there can't be a sense object without a sense, and there can't be, sense is always connected to a sense object. So those arise mutually together, and that creates the phenomenal world. It is created essentially as a stream of input sensations into our mind. Now, that's the first category. And interestingly enough, they have an 11th form called the form element with no manifestation. And that turns out to be volition or will. So when we get up and decide to do something, like I'm going to go wash the dishes, that volition, that will, that maybe gets us up off our feet and doing something, that's the element with no manifestation. You don't see the will. You can't. It doesn't have any physical quality, but it's very real. And it's very real, and it gets us moving, and it creates action. And so it's part of the phenomenal world, part of the physical world, because it's what moves the physical world around, at least moves us around within the physical world. Now the second category, in a little bit, in terms of the skandhas, consciousness would be the 5th category, but here they're using it in this chart. It comes up as element number 12, mind, or chitta, as in bodhicitta, awakened mind, or in chitta mantra, the mind only word is used too. So consciousness or mind is sort of in its own category. And if you think about it, that is what is synthesized. That is sort of also like perception in the system. So the senses are feeding us sensations about the outside world. And that's our experience. That's our experiential feed. That's our existential feed. And then the mind or consciousness recognizes and it becomes aware of all of this. It provides the awareness. It's all happening on this stage of consciousness, in this field of consciousness in which things are being recognized. And then after that, we get to a huge list called mental faculties. So mind, which is consciousness, has all these faculties. Mind in its essential nature is pure consciousness, but in its full nature has all these various faculties, and it's kind of full-blown. And some of these are good, and some of these are bad, and some of these are just neutral functions. But they all are kind of various kinds of concepts that guide us, or feelings. So in that sense, there are all sorts of different good and bad feelings, good or bad concepts, ideas that we have, thoughts, and so forth. So the whole content of our mind is divided up into a large number of mental functions or faculties. So the general functions, they talk about perception, generating ideas, the will, in a more specific sense, touch. Some of these things kind of get repeated. Wishing, the intellect, remembrance, attention, decisions, concentration. So these are all kind of a list of general functions that could be, they're sort of neutral, they could be used in any way, that everyone has. Everyone has the ability to be focused, to make decisions, to pay attention, to remember things, to be able to analyze things, to have generate desires, to reach out and touch something, to have ideas and perceptions about stuff, and to explore that. So that's just the general nature of how a mind functions in this particular view. Then there are general good kinds of qualities to mind, and those are the next 10 elements or so. The mind can have good beliefs, it can have energy, it can have detachment, it can feel shame. And people have asked, well, what is shame? And shame, I had a good definition this week I read of it. It's respecting the opinions of others. In that sense, it's acting appropriately, so you're not making a fool of yourself in front of other people, and having some sense of that. This way when they say the President of the United States is shameless, it tells you what shame is. He has no concern about what other people think. Most of us actually concerned about what other people think, and we sort of adapt our behavior as not to be so rude. The next one is bashfulness, shyness. Shyness is considered a positive quality in a practitioner. Non-greediness, non-malevolence, non-injury, the opposite of three poisons, seen as positive qualities. So, later on those are going to be things like generosity, compassion, and so forth. But right now they're not causing harm to anyone, not wishing other people ill will, not being greedy, having confidence, exerting oneself. So those 10 things are like positive qualities that help us on the path. And those are, again, those are all mental states or feelings or that come up in connection with other things that are coming up. So all this is getting mixed together. So, the phenomenal world is giving us sort of a stream of continual input. Mind is sort of recognizing it. Consciousness is providing, a stage for all of this. And then all these different mental functions, our minds are alive and actively engaging the world in the ways we enumerated earlier. And then all these feelings about the world are coming up as well. So those are the kind of good ones that come up. Then, of course, there are defiled feelings, which eventually, through practice, those are going to get purged or purified. And defiled feelings include ignorance, idleness, indolence, disbelief, low-mindedness, and high-mindedness. Perhaps pride is meant there. And then general functions of evil get their own category, and that has two elements, shamelessness and non-bashfulness. I guess that would be attention-seeking. It seems to be a very prevalent one. Actually, those are very prevalent now. If you think about it, we have a lot of shameless attention seekers out there in the world today, led by our executive in chief. And as the Abhidharma says here, those are basically That's basically what evil is. Shameless attention seeking. Then there are minor defilements compared to that. Anger, concealment, miserliness, envy, affliction of others, injury, ill will, enmity, deceit, fraudulence, arrogance. So those are all other defilements, states of mind that one could get into or cycle through as one tweets. And then there are various functions of mind that are neither here nor there morally. You can see we just went through this whole psychological, ethical, moral. A lot of their elements of existence, they're not really scientific elements, they're more mental states that can aid us or harm us depending on what state it is that we're in. And then there are ones that are neutral, repentance, drowsiness, reflection, investigation, wanting things, covetousness, hatred, pride, doubt. Actually, some of those are well, actually, those could be used in their indeterminate nature. It might be hatred of injustice or something like that. Or, there are situations where those could be positive. That's why I think they're included there. So those are all different kinds of mental states that could come up and arise and create, in this moment that is reality. And then there are other elements of reality from an existential standpoint that they enumerate. Acquiring things, not acquiring things, gathering similar things together, and then various meditative states like fruition in the thoughtless heaven or non-conceptual heaven, non-conceptual ecstasy, a certain trance state called Nirodha, which is the absence of everything. Nirodha is like stopping your mind, that trance state. So these are not mental things. These are just sort of basic qualities with possibilities of and then life, birth, stability, decay, impermanence, and then curiously enough, name, sentence, and letter. So there's this kind of idea that language has this is part of the elemental mix at these different levels. And then we get to so that's all. And everything that we've enumerated, we're up to number 72. All the way back from sense organs, sense objects, generations of mind, ethical states of mind, additional kind of existential qualities to existence. All of that, all those 72 elements are all created. They're all temporal. They come and they go. There's nothing permanent there. They're just the ingredients that make the moment up. And like Terry is always has these recipes that have 20 ingredients. This is a recipe with 72 possible ingredients. Now in one moment you don't put all 72 in there, but you're creating. You're baking something all the time with this is your pantry that you're pulling it from. So you see something, your mind recognizes it, it remembers this is somebody you don't like, you don't like them, they harmed you in some way, you get angry, there's certain kinds of emotions that come up, there's thoughts about this person that come up, and so forth. And that's the mix of that moment. Then something else happens later, and another mix comes in, and it's just like that. They're just combining and recombining all the time, and that's actually the created world. So that is the reality. It's all these elements combining and recombining, and they're all real, but they're not. But what we see in terms of phenomenal world, we see the kind of what it looks like in the moment once it's combined. So we see the chariot, we don't see the pieces that went into the chariot. We see the house, we don't see the materials that went into the house. But if you took the chariot apart, or you took the house apart, or you took any composite object apart, it's just a bunch of pieces of stuff that have been arranged to create that. And that's what reality is. It's been created from a bunch of pieces. In fact, and the pieces are real, but what you're seeing is just a momentary creation. Now there are 3 non-created elements. So that means that these are unborn, and hence they're not temporal. And the first of these is element number 73 in the system, the Kosha, space. Space is the container for all, is the primordial and continuous unborn container for all of whatever is created. This whole mixing process that goes on continuously is all happening in space. The second one is nirvana, or liberation, extinction through realization. And the third is nirvana, or liberation due to lack of causes, that you've exhausted all desire, so there's no further birth. So the 3 things that are not part of creation are space and liberation. Now you can see this is very old stuff. This is all going back to the Savastivadins and going back to even as early as the 2nd century BC. And you have something that's very close to our current, like, teachings of Dzogchen, which is much later formulation, in that what's ultimate, unchanging, unborn space awareness, and that to realize space awareness, to awaken to that, is liberation. So I'll stop. Have any questions?
Yeah, Bruce, I had a clarifying question. On the Abhidharma and the Theravadins, are they not practitioners of Abhidharma philosophy then?
Yeah, they have their own Abhidharma. They're famous. Their famous commentator on the Abhidharma, who wrote at the same time, actually, as Vasubandhu was writing the Abhidharma Kosha, who wrote Buddhagasta, and he wrote a book called The Path of Purification, and that's a giant compendium of Theravada, the most revered compendium of Theravada Abhidharma, written about the 4th century. And you can buy that, it's a giant work. Shambhala published it a long time ago. The Path of Purification. And It's good. It's good. It's hard to read. You can't read these things cover to cover, but Buddha Ghost was really good because he does a great job on things like the 40 meditations on a corpse. Essentially, when you get the commentaries worked in, and by the time you're at Buddha Ghost, you've had lots of commentaries, you had the original summaries. I mean, the whole thing started out just by lists, and then they just kept adding to it until it becomes sort of like, the Catholic Catechism. I mean, it's just a giant work that contains, like the Catechism contains all Catholic philosophy, sort of more or less. These Abhidharmas were like that. They weren't in that form, and the Catechism, they were treated in the same way. They were things that you learned, because that was the system. That's maybe the Catholics are kind of their system.
So this stuff predates the whole Dzogchen idea of primordial awareness.
Yes. I mean, they're not quite there yet. There's something that they've got. It's the foundation is there. That's what I'm saying. This idea of space being the primary non-created element is already suggesting this idea of primordial awareness or state awareness.
But that whole idea that outside of the phenomenal play of all these conditions, that there's nothing behind it, is different than saying there's knowing and compassion and presence that's behind it.
Well, knowing compassion would be functions, but
in their concept, in their structure. But primordial awareness.
Primordial awareness is what's behind it. I mean, Buddha nature, actually, or suchness. So in Mahayana, in fact, the whole way I've always thought that the world is, of course, I've also studied Platonism, which, there's, in Christianity, there's something behind everything. God's behind everything, or awareness is behind everything, or Buddha's behind. Everything is made of Buddha. Everything is made of awareness. So there is sort of this sense of, for us, we're always talking about how appearances arise out of awareness, the display of this primordial awareness. So in Dzogchen, there definitely is something behind appearance, and that is primordial awareness. So when I'm reading through this one, I got this sudden insight that they don't have that view.
Right.
I mean, they don't have the idea of, like I'm just resting in primordial awareness, and I feel comfortable with this, they don't have that.
No. That's what I'm picking up, is they don't have that.
Yes. And it's a whole different way of looking at things. I mean,
right.
You are a prisoner of the moment. There's nothing but the moment, except getting out of that moment, liberating you, detaching yourself from it, and that's free.
But then to what?
Well, they don't.
I mean, where are you going?
They don't say.
Right.
They tell you how to get there, but they don't say what you get when you get there.
Right.
Not as clearly as we do later on.
Well, isn't Nirodha, Nirvana,
and that's what I hear the Buddha silent about what happens at that point. The noble silence kicks in.
but Nirvana and Nirodha, they just mean like gone. Like, I mean, do you think, is there a sense
And
of
what's gone is that, I mean, to be a little more or less vague, what's gone is self. Right. Oh, the Buddha Shakyamuni himself is so gone that there's no Siddhartha. He's one with awareness. In fact, he's so gone that far gone that when he dies and has his parinirvana, he doesn't come back in any form at all. He doesn't come back as anything created. The Buddha Shakyamuni goes right to the uncreated. He's one with the uncreated. But he's like one with awareness. So Shakyamuni Buddha is awareness itself. At this point, there's nothing different. Buddha and awareness are saying the same thing. Now, all the other Buddhas, even the Dharmakaya Buddhas, like Amitabha and Brahmasambhava and Varachana, all the other ones have some semblance. Even Samantabhadra has a little bit of form, but Shakyamuni is totally para, beyond it all. So that's their idea. And they want to be like that. So it's what's going to happen is the self is gone, and you're going to just be awareness, and that. Which is, what can you say? I mean, no one left to say anything at that point. Right? Can't complain. There's no self to complain. Can't be excited. There's no self to be excited. That's a pretty. That's fine. I mean, but I think in the Mahayana start modifying that idea a bit, and now you don't get, it becomes less austere than that. Liberation isn't an escape from this moment, this endless samsaric moment. It's realizing that primordial awareness that is the basic energy from which everything is created. And when you realize the basic energy out of which everything is created, this primordial awareness, this Dzogchen Chenpo, then you just rest in that, and that is the peace and realization. And then forms can be created or not created. It's neither here nor there. So there's no particular reason to get rid of anything at that point. But here, they're trying to get out of it, and that's for sure.
So is that a nihilism? Is this like early nihilistic view that there's nothing behind it, and that I feel like
no, if you're going to become awakened, remember the Buddha. The first definition of the Dharma was samadhi, and also the thing with faith in Buddhism is that there's no substance, there's no permanence, and there's no bliss except in nirvana. So, nirvana, the only thing they'll say about it is that it's bliss. And the only bliss possible is nirvana. There's no bliss in samsara. There's only suffering in samsara. That momentary mix that's rolling along in our minds, our stream of consciousness is always suffering, greater or lesser suffering. So it's not, to be in bliss and to be one with awakened mind, and that's not realistic.
Being in bliss and being resting in the basic energy out of which everything is created, is that nirvana? Okay.
And so they're different. There's the nirvana realization, where you first realize that that there is such a thing as a basic Buddha energy that's holding it all together, so to speak. That's the primordial awareness, is the container. That's initial, like samadhi or nirvana. So that happens when you're still alive, generally. Then there's a final nirvana where you die, and that's different. But and then there's this idea of the Buddha having attained a nirvana where it's continuous. So initially, one just has an experience where one realizes that suchness, Buddha nature, primordial awareness, this is real, this is the primary thing. It's like in the three statements of Hira Dorje: realize your nature as awareness. Number 2, make that the first primary thing in your life. And 3, grow familiar with that. So the first thing is and the first time you realize that, that's nirvana. And then as you make it the first thing in your life, and you gain confidence in your realization, then you're on your way to the kind of a complete sustained nirvana. For continually liberation, full liberation, full alignment.
We just tie the 3 points of Hira Dorje back into, what was that connection? That's the basic.
What she was asking about nirvana, and it's liberation, but in the way we understand it now, it has kind of a initial breakthrough, and then that leads to further development, and that's expressed in the 3 points. The first, recognize reality, and then make the primordial in your awareness the principal thing, and then get confident and familiar with it.
Thank you.
I mean, that's essentially the Dzogchen path. And the Dzogchen path, compared to the Abhidharma, is obviously going to be a lot quicker. I mean, there's no analysis of reality to any level of element. I mean, you don't have to know the Abhidharma at all to realize the primordial nature of things, the non-conceptual. You just have to experience that space in which everything stops, which maybe some point that happens, and then it happens more, gradually happens more often.
And that's something that present even when you're sleeping and all that.
Mm-hmm.
It's present even during sleep, correct?
Well, awareness is always present. Awareness is unborn, like space. I mean, it's always here. Like, when does space disappear?
It would seem like the Dzogchen path is simpler, not necessarily quicker, because it's. I mean, the process is three steps, but those steps could take, lifetimes. I mean, it's not. I mean, how much control do we have over when we become aware of primordial awareness?
Right, as in, yeah. Yeah, it's quicker. You're right, quicker. It's simpler, not quicker.
It's simpler, yeah.
In fact, I don't think in Dzogchen they ever claim it's quicker. They say it's good for the lazy person. And so that now in Tantra they will say it's quicker because the tantric methods of the sadhana and the mantra and the visualization and becoming a deity are much quicker than sitting on your bum meditating for eons and eons. But it's Dzogchen, it's simply simpler and it's more. It's really waiting.
Waiting without a goal.
Uh-huh.
She could pull that off.
Uh-huh. But always being present, So it's not just, you don't have to do anything, but you're told not to let yourself be distracted.
Right.
So you have to be present.
Right.
Where Abhidharma is fascinating, it's not fascinating so much as a path that we would engage in or spend a whole lot of time, wrestling as to which of these elements belong in the chart and how they all relate and stuff. Although they analyzed it, 20 ways to Sunday. But you have to think, this is being developed in the 2nd century BC, and it's a very well-developed human psychology. What is it that humans experience? What is the mind like? I mean, these are the guys, that Freud and Jung and psychologists, since psychology in the West that's been developing in, the last 200 years. And they're still not quite that sophisticated in terms of saying, well, what's going on in our mind? Of course, now they're totally into neuroscience and, mapping it out in that way. But they don't have they can't. The problem is that when you map it out physically, how do you get back to something as complex as an emotion, or these kind of or a moral quality? I mean, they're not going to find, a neuron in the brain that corresponds with shamelessness. But as far as the different kinds of things the human can experience existentially, I mean, this is brilliant. I mean, this is a very deep psychological understanding. I mean, they observed their own minds, they observed other people, and they saw these are the different kind of things that are going on in people's heads, and they were able to kind of enumerate it and systematize it, and saw how it worked, and looking at the whole mechanism of what mind is. And that's what I think it has some fascination even to the day, is as a psychology of human, as a portrait of the mind.
I have a kind of a question on that last point there. I read something recently. It was an article written by I think it was a Tibetan Lama, and he was saying basically that Westerners' fascination with knowing their feelings, knowing their emotions is like our fundamental flaw with, especially as we approach the Dharma. But it creates a whole lot of suffering. And I've also heard people say Tibetans especially relate to emotions a lot differently. They don't really express emotions in the same way that we do, that we're more obsessed with our emotions. So I didn't know if you had any particular opinion on that. Just how psychology works both Eastern and Western, because I've also heard the Dalai Lama say, self-judgment, is really something that didn't exist very much in Tibetan culture, but it's like hugely prevalent in the West. And I've also heard it described as an emotional autoimmune disease, which I thought was kind of a good way of putting it. I don't know if you have any comment on that perspective.
Well, I think, yeah. So many questions wrapped up into that one.
I know, I kind of barked out a lot there.
The Western, generally the Western mind is considerably, in my sense of it, more analytical than, say, the Asian mind. I don't think the Asians have naturally, the Indians are kind of analytically oriented, and Americans are, but say Tibetans and Chinese are not especially great, and Japanese are the worst at being analytical. But being analytical is sort of one part of it, as opposed to being, say, more spontaneous or such. It's also how seriously you take thoughts and feelings. And there is a sense, kind of more in Western, well, it's really all through Western, it's in the New Age, it's in Christianity, it's in all. Westerners are essentially self-obsessed in a way that Asians aren't. Asians, in a general sense, Far East, are communally oriented. So from them, you're talking again the Tibetan perspective, and in the Chinese perspective and Japanese, is there's more sense of you are less obsession with yourself as an individual. The Western culture is, person obsessed. The religions are person obsessed. There's a lot of brooding on one's qualities, and among that is things like self-judgment. And that is a problem in the West, but Buddhism is precisely the cure for that problem, because meditation is not about obsessing about yourself in any way, sense, or form. But ironically, if you spend enough hours in meditation, you get to know every thought and feeling you've ever had or could have. I mean, a lot of time there, you're on the cushion, right? And your mind is mulling over a number of things. But the idea with the meditation is that you're kind of flushing it out. And that's a big difference, say, between the Buddhist approach and something like psychoanalysis, or amateur psychoanalysis, where you're just brooding over your personality or qualities you have all the time. The whole thing is not to continually analyze yourself or self-obsessed in that kind of way. Is to flush it out and become selfless, become in the moment. But communal qualities are going to have to be fleshed out as well. So you have that. If you cultural qualities, you're going to have, those are all thoughts and feelings connected with that too. So you can't talk about being selfless and then wanting to beat on the Rohingya or something like that. It's not going to work. I mean, you got to flesh out your cultural prejudices. You got to flesh out your all kinds of, any idea. All that's got to be dropped. But on the way to being dropped, you're going to see it. You're going to touch it and let it go. And so it's just, the whole approach of Buddhism is to flesh things out. And I think we're as capable of doing that as anyone. I think in that point, it's a question of practice and how open and honest you are a practitioner. I think there are Tibetans. I don't think you can say that the Asians have any advantage flushing out their prejudices, which are oftentimes cultural. They're not as self-obsessed, but they're kind of more culture-obsessed in the way that we are. So and both of those have to go.
Bruce. So what does Buddha say about nature? I hear in the Abhidharma that you were describing, or the chart, that the 10 elements include the forms, everything we perceive with our senses. And, presumably in my thinking, everything that arises from the pure awareness, the energy that is in the natural world is, in my mind, it elevates this status of that for me. And sometimes when Joe asks, isn't this sort of nihilistic? We're trying to flush everything. So I'm just savoring that whole idea of nature, the created world that arises out of the energy that's tied together by the energy.
Well, in the early tradition, you don't get well, it's hard to say. I mean, in a sense, they're accepting the fact that you understand what a chariot is. Just because everything is made up of elements, the fact that it's made into a chariot is useful. And so they're they use chariots. They how they sleep and how they use all sorts of composite things. They eat baked goods. And nature is just because it's composite, and we know that nature is all composed of cells and chemical processes and chemicals and all kinds of stuff coming together. That doesn't mean that we don't appreciate what it's come together to be. And even in early Buddhism, they're living out in the woods, they're living out in nature, they're sitting under trees. They're in fact really comfortable with nature. They're not killing anything, they're not killing the animals, they're not harming the plants. They're just, kind of one with all of that. So I think in reality they have a very positive, even if they don't talk about it a lot, but in the early Buddhism, just when you look at how they're living and what they're doing, they're as one with nature is way more than we'll ever be. And that whole attitude of gentleness towards nature and being one with nature, I think, is something we should try and recover. We talk about it a lot, but we don't really, really get, got to get there and be one with it all. In that way, all of nature is mind. Everything that you experience, the whole world is within your mind. And all the contents of mind, the whole approach of meditation is really a kind of very gentle way of acknowledging those contents, seeing them as they are, but not holding on to them. So even though we love nature and we appreciate nature and we're gentle towards it and living in it, we're not holding on to it. We're not. Everything is just allowed to be as it is, without trying to change it or project any of our neurosis on it. So it's no way as idealistic.
Well, and it sounds like the Buddha wouldn't have a problem with somebody making a chariot if the element with no manifestation, their will or volition, if it came through them from the energy of the universe, he wouldn't have a problem with people making something of beauty, interacting with nature. He's not asking us to deny that will or volition that we feel, right?
No, he's not. He's really only concerned with us not getting into evil states of mind.
Mm-hmm.
We're working on our conduct, so
Uh-huh.
that we don't have those kinds of bad behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding how things are set up so that we don't waste time chasing after stuff that can't satisfy us, and emptying our minds of personal preoccupations and thoughts and such, so that we can actually experience the phenomenal purely and directly. And in fact, and that's even as far back as Buddha. Of course, we're in Dzogchen. We're working off of a whole Mahayana tantric Dzogchen basis, where, and in Tantra especially, the phenomenal world is just totally embraced in all aspects, and pure part of everything is sacred, because everything is made up of sacred energy. So even the chariot is as sacred as the pieces making up this chariot. The chariot doesn't exist as there's no once you break it up, it's gone. But everything is still temporal. There's not getting around that, but it's sacred temporal.
Thank you.
Well, I'm not exhausted, so I think we'll
Yeah,
call.
thank you. Thank you for your time
And
and energy.
next week I'm going to try and do I'll do another version. We'll look at the yoga Yogacara, later version of this same list, and see how the Yogacharans play off the Abhidharma, and add a few extra things.
But Yogacharans are, by that point, Mahayana, right?
Let's see if I can remember this here. By this merit, all pain and mischief may defeat enemy wrong. From the stormy waves of purple they frequent themselves. From the ocean of samsara,
You are free, all beings.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you,
Good night.
everybody.
Good night. Thanks.